Hello. All right. So today I'm going to be reviewing. Uh, so excited for this. I have a lot to say about this album. This is my second favorite album of all time, and it is my favorite album by the Icelandic tour de force that she is, Björk. And I am very excited to get into this album, Vespertine, which is my favorite album of hers, as I said, and my second favorite album of all time. Lots to unpack with this record. I first heard this album not when it was originally released. This album was released on August 27th, 2001, and it is her fourth studio album as an independent artist. But I didn't really fully hear this album in its entirety to about 5 years ago, and then before that, the few years prior, I heard some tracks like Hidden Place, for example, before that. And when I finally listened to this album in its entirety, I was absolutely floored by the way the storytelling was depicted, by the sounds. The sounds are really on another plane here. She was really ahead of her time, really, in this sort of ambient electronic production that she was dealing with, which she did a whole lot of herself. Thing that she gets frustrated by, because it's in reviews and interviews, people talk about her production team, Matmos. Her producer even corrects interviewers in saying that, he only helped at the very last few weeks of the album's production in tying all the production together. Björk herself did 3 years worth of work on this record and producing, not just writing the songs and lyrics, which are, of course, on their own, just an amazing work of art to begin with. So, diving right into this, the first track, Hidden Place. Now, to summarize this album, this is an album on the surface, but also on a very deep level that is about sex, but it's about so much more than that. At least in my interpretation, and that's what I'll be getting into a lot with discussing this record. She's called this album a haberdashery of emotion through microbeats, or something along that line, and I think it illustrates this album so beautifully. The title, Vespertine, refers to things that come out in the evening. This album has been described by her as being very introspective and being a domestic album about the garden of the home, basically, she calls it. It was originally going to be called Domestica. That was a working title for the album, but she chose Vespertine because it was a little bit less obvious with what she was trying to say with that title, and I think it sounds really nice. Vespertine having to do with the evening, flowers that only bloom at night. There's a lot of metaphor to sex, but to real intimacy with her partner. And now, obviously, this was when she was with Matthew Barney, and this album could be construed as a huge love letter to him and to sex with him. And it's not something that I necessarily think about when I listen to this album, but yes, she was very inspired by, I'm sure, some amazing sexual experiences. Björk is not new to this, and she continues along this route with further works. So diving into Hidden Place, the first track and the first single off of this album, we get a song that is, on the one hand, it is coy, because it's dealing with something so ephemeral and, difficult to talk about, like, not something that's palpable. But then at the same time, the lyrics definitely relate to the first sort of sexual encounter that you have with someone you truly love. The lyrics right out of the gate go right into this. Through the warmthest cord of care, your love was sent to me. I'm not sure what to do with it or where to put it. I'm so close to tears and so close to simply calling you up. I'm simply suggesting we go to a hidden place. So that sort of forms the narrative of what she's trying to explain in this song, and then the song just kind of alludes to all of these, touching feels, different sensations that you can feel in a sexual experience. But again, what I'm going to talk about a lot with this record is how on the surface you could think this is just about traditional sex, but this could also be construed as a more spiritual experience. And a lot of these songs, for my first listen to, as someone who wasn't very sexually experienced when I first listened to this album, I didn't necessarily take it to those levels. With the I don't want to call it vagueness, but with the openness to some of the lyrics, this could be construed as a very spiritual sort of quest for someone's inner self. There lies my passion hidden. You know, when she even mentions he as the pronoun, what is she referring to? I mean, that definitely speaks to automatically thinking a lover from a female perspective. But these things, they kind of all kind of mesh together into this soup of euphoric kind of ecstasy and praise of something divine. And that something divine could be a religious icon, or it could be a sexual partner, it could be a romantic partner, or it could be something, you know, truly personal in someone's self-awareness and quest for self-love. And so that's where I take these songs that step further. Hidden Place has an amazing chorus. She uses a choir in a lot of these songs, and I love that because the choir really adds a sort of what I would consider sort of a church aspect to the album, but it's in a way that's so mellifluous and so melodically inclined, so that it really gives you this feeling of songs for the evening. One can think of like Vespers, songs that would be sung at night, like little evening prayers. There's a quietness to these choral melodies that are still strong and they have a presence, but they're very angelic and they're very soft at the same time, and they're used throughout. But the production as well, the atmospheric production just is top notch. And I can imagine at the time that this was being released, this was still kind of a new thing, and she was exploring territory that had not really been explored before. Moving into Cocoon, which was the third single off of this album, we get a song that's probably the most explicit in her lyrics and possibly the most explicit sex song Björk has ever recorded. It is, on the surface, I mean, it is purely about sex. I mean, there's no denying it. I mean, she's talking about when he enters her, she's talking about falling asleep and waking up and him still being within her. So it is exploring the female experience of a sexual encounter. But again, the lyrics are getting almost more abstract. They're getting so poetic. One of my favorite lyrics, I think, or stanzas from the whole album, a train of pearls, cabin by cabin, is shot precisely across an ocean. I mean, taking out the sexual connotations, this has such a, well, I think it alludes a lot to some work of Matthew Barney's, her ex-partner that she was with, because of his work, which deals a lot with these sort of, what I would kind of, I mean, the best way to explain it is saying that this lyric kind of illustrates what his work is, I think, illustrated visually, which is dealt a lot with sex. I mean, it deals with, I think, some work that he has employed, some performance art that has been, it's sexual, but it's like meticulous and it's deliberate. It's very difficult to explain, and it really is best explained through poetry or through visual art. And so the tie-in with this makes this piece an experience that I think really works well on all senses: visual, auditory, almost sensual. You know, you can almost feel the touch of what she's explaining as she explains it in the song. So the multisensory aspect of this, especially in headphones, because, you know, the sound is so close to your ear, you can hear these sounds that she uses. It sounds like a typewriter. I remember listening to an interview where she talks about all the different sounds that she recorded. A lot of them are domestic sounds, like jinglings of keys, the sound of tap dripping. You know, she used a lot of sounds that you record in the home to back a lot of the tracks on this album, and she mixed them together, and that's where you get all these different little beats. And this is definitely the song that has the most micro beats, minimalistic approach, very stripped back, just her voice, very close to the microphone, very breathy. It's not my favorite track on the album, but believe me, it packs. I mean, it just, to have it be the second track, it really gives you an idea of like how intimate she's going to be with herself. Like, she is bearing herself naked before you, but in the most artful and dignified way that other artists have done in the past with their sex albums, like Madonna comes to mind. And although I appreciate it for what it was, I don't believe it was artfully done in the way that I think Björk pulled off beautifully. And that's just my opinion, but, you know, to each his own. Moving into It's Not Up to You, she turns gears here, and she's taking it a bit away from the nighttime and the bedroom, and she's sort of taking you to the rest of the space of her house, it could be described. With the lyrics, she's talking about, you know, you kind of imagine her walking around the house kind of almost bored. There is a sense of boredom. And there's a sense of angst. I take this song to be very existential. I think it takes the scope of this album a little bit away from just romance and sex, and really talks about, like, you know, where you take your life and how you choose to live each day and wake up in the morning. You know, I wake up and everything feels the same. How do I find inspiration? Is it through your lover? Is it through those Vespertine acts that you know, partake in every night? Or is there something more spiritually that you're looking for? This song has a beautiful choir that is employed. Along with the following song, Undo, these two songs really stand out for me as one of my favorites of the album, because they are touching on something that is a little bit less tied to a sexual experience and a little bit more open to sort of a more spiritual discovery of one's own nature and how they think and react and interact with the world. And so Undo is about, like, healing yourself. It's very soothing. It's very hypnotic. It sort of entrances you. She's trying to entrance you in a way with her production and her lyricism and melody. And the choir swells and swells and swells. And then it, just like It's Not Up to You, both songs end with this sort of really introspective feeling sound, where suddenly the sound becomes super close to you, and you feel this urgency to the lyrics. And I forgot to mention in It's Not Up to You, the way the song ends, I mean, is such a direct contrast to the opening and beginning of the song. It feels so close and feels so, you know, warm. And that's something that, you know, this album she's also described as her winter album. You get that feeling of closeness and warmth, but it's also a longing. It's expressing angst. It's expressing confusion, existential angst. So these tracks all kind of weave together so beautifully, and Undo ends in a similar vein, where we have this sort of harp playing that sort of is just, again, like, it could be lulling you to sleep. It could just be relaxing you after the crescendo and decrescendo of the song. We come into Pagan Poetry, which was her second single off of this album. Now, it's my least favorite song, but it definitely, saying that's my least favorite does not mean anything. It's still light years above most songs I've heard. I mean, this song has a really unique hook, a really unique way of her singing. She's exploring and expressing deep, dark thoughts and fears, and it comes across through sort of vaguely sexual lyrics and innuendos, but they're so artfully dealt with. It's hard to explain, but, you know, I find this song to be an exploration of the intangible and the sort of existential aspects that come with why we have sex and why we enjoy what we enjoy. I don't know. That's how I take this song, and I leave it a lot to sort of, it's one of those songs I try not to think too hard about, because it will really kind of you'll rack your brain so much. You just kind of enjoy and get swept up in it, and the rise and fall. We come then into Frosti, which is a small little interlude song. It's actually one of my favorites, and it employs a music box, which is really unique for a recording artist. And I love the sound of this little short 2-minute track that leads you into Aurora. It's the most beautiful sort of snow winter feeling song. It's very, you know, the song's title is Frosti. It just depicts a winter day or a winter evening, and it gives you such a visual of, like, trees covered in snow. I often envision this song being played in, like, a Christmas, you know, like those Christmas displays where they have all those Christmas trees and, you know, the snow falling and all the fake snow everywhere. It definitely has that feel, and I just love the sound of the music box, which kind of comes back and forth in other little parts of the album. We go into Aurora. She starts with the sound of crunching snow under the feet, leading you in. And now on the surface, she's talking about trekking a glacier head. She's talking about exploring the many, you know, Iceland, where she is from, is known for these humongous glaciers, these beautiful winter landscapes. So on the surface, we're talking about Aurora, you know, the Aurora Borealis, which you can see in Iceland. This song comes across as, and it's how I interpreted it, as an ode to Icelandic glaciers. But on the deeper level, you can also kind of say that this song is also very sexual. She's talking about snow and how it melts in her mouth. She's talking about sinking her teeth into this experience of white snow, you know, spark the sun off of me. Aurora, goddess sparkle, a mountain shade suggests your shape. I tumbled down on my knees. Fill the mouth with snow, the way it melts. I wish to melt into you, Aurora, utter mundane. So the lyrics can go in that direction. I love the last line, utter mundane, because it's so left field. But, that's, if you're familiar with Björk, you know that she has a knack for picking very left field, surprising lyrics that fit so well. And it wouldn't feel like it was wrong at all. But you look at it and you're like, why does that make any sense? And it does to me, but I can't really explain why it makes sense. It just does. And it's artful wordplay, it's word porn, to be honest. I mean, that's what she's really good at with this songwriting. And I feel like it just fits perfectly in the sound of the song and the meaning of it. Moving into An Echo, a Stain, another really, really nice highlight track for me. We have some of the most hypnotic sounds Björk has ever experimented with. This song is so dark and seductive, and it does touch on something really, really dark, I believe. I mean, the lyrics are very up to interpretation and are very mysterious and could somewhat contradict each other. When she says, I'm sorry you saw that, but she's like playing herself up or talking about someone in a very, acting very seductive and very sensual. Then she ends with free falling, complete. Some people could construe this being about some sort of abuse. Some people could see this being about some sort of forbidden love or tryst. It's very open to interpretation. And again, I don't like to take these lyrics too seriously. They're beautiful and they're about serious, dark subject matter. It's very deep, but I don't think when she's writing this that she's thinking, oh, this is gonna be obviously construed as one thing if people can dissect it. I think it's just so left so open-ended on purpose so that you can really construe your own beautiful meaning. And it's how I derive so much more spiritual meaning from so many of these songs. I take these songs out of a sexual context, and when they say touching, I think of spiritually being touched. I think of higher consciousness and meditation and things like Kundalini activating and stuff like that. I take it more along that route. And so I think of these songs as being highly spiritual and sacred in that regard. They could be considered sexual mantras or, more just like physical spiritual mantras, depending on how you want to put it, maybe even more dogmatically as well, though I wouldn't put it quite in that regard. That's just the beauty of these songs and the way she just sort of leaves all the doors open with all the possible avenues of interpretation and variety of descriptions that she uses. And then it come into a song called The Sun in My Mouth, which is actually a poem by E.E. Cummings called I Will Wait Out from the 1920s that she reinterprets into this beautiful melody, really beautiful, gorgeous poetry that matches so well with her own songwriting that you would think she wrote the song herself. And again, the sexual metaphors are vague and, talking about I'll take the sun in my mouth. The next track, Heirloom, although not my favorite, has a very unique beat and sound that kind of separates it from the rest of the album. It gets a little bit, it feels very nighttime and it feels still very introspective, but it has a unique sort of sound to it that sticks out, I think, from a lot of the other songs on the album. It's a little bit more positive and uplifting in melody, though, and I think it has a very interesting sort of way of referring to, her family history. She says, I have a recurrent dream and my mother's seed and my son, they kind of pour through me. She hadn't yet had her second child, her daughter, but I'm sure she was thinking about having, her children. She'd already had one child earlier, and but I'd imagine this song is sort of, again, all of these songs, they come together so beautifully and touch on all these topics. But I try not to get too wrapped up in the intricate meanings of all of the lyrics. I just appreciate them for what they are, even if they're very sort of difficult to dissect and analyze. I'm not even the type of person who always wants to go too crazy with analyzing lyrics anyway. I just take them as what they are, and I sort of I just feel the sounds and I don't take it too deeply in the sense of analyzing. But what I really want to spend a lot of time talking about is Harm of Will, which is the second to last track. This song, although its meaning has been debated a lot, this song is very unique. It's like Cocoon. It's very soft. It has these beautiful orchestral elements at the beginning and end that give it this very sweeping, almost stage-like presence that I can only imagine performed live is truly an experience. And it's ultimately super melancholic and very mysterious in the delivery. This way is as is she, and he placed her unclothed, long-legged, on top of the family tree. So, she talks about what could be construed as something that's not such a pleasant experience, sexual experience, such as rape, which, I mean, to me, that's how it does come across. But it has this hopeful, sort of triumphant tone of this person will rise above whatever has happened to them. And this person is all powerful in their own sort of spiritual essence, and they will not be touched, even if they are touched inappropriately in a sexual way, that their spiritual self is higher than this and cannot be harmed. This is almost what cannot be harmed, even if sexually someone has been damaged, which is a horrific sort of event. And the whole time, sex is being sort of celebrated on this album, and this one song kind of flips it on its head a little bit, and perhaps depicts sex as somewhat a little bit less of a pleasurable experience and more of as something that is being done to someone against their will, which is an interesting paradigm shift for the tone of this album. But I don't take it too directly in that direction, because it is still up to interpretation, and it is still a very abstract song lyrically. One of the most abstract songs lyrically on this album. We end with Unison, which ties up and brings the mood back of the album to a very sort of positive and uplifting melody and a beat that is really addicting and catchy, and it has like a really bouncy attitude to it. It has one of my favorite lines in a Björk song ever: "I thrive best hermit style, with a beard and a pipe, and a parrot on each side." So she's, kind of almost autobiographically now placing herself back into the story, and she's explaining about two lovers deciding to compromise. I never thought we could compromise. I never thought we could come together, but let's unite tonight, and let's make the most beautiful thing out of this that we could. And so it brings the theme full circle of the album, ties into it a beautiful romantic or sexual experience that really crescendos. And talk about an orgasmic choral ending for a song. But of course it ends the album on also a sense of unity and peace, which you would always expect from a lot of Björk records, especially after Homogenic, when she ends with the triumphant "all is full of love." This song echoes that, but it's just, again, it's more introspective, it's more crisp, it's more nuanced, it's more detailed. It even ends with this looping harp that just sort of cycles and cycles and could go on and on and on, as if you truly are in this euphoric bliss that she is describing, that is building and building from this experience. So all in all, this album is definitely depicting sort of the beginning of a beautiful relationship, and I think that it documents that in a very sort of autobiographical fashion, but at the same time, she takes herself out of it enough for it to be interpreted by so many different beings, although it is told from a very feminine, very female perspective. The sexual experiences are really told from the female perspective. It still has this way of letting you into the lyrics because the doors are always open for it to be interpreted in so many different ways. It's so deep, so exploratory in its subject matter, that it'll always be confounding, questioning our interpretations of it for years and years and years. And it's one of the reasons why this album stands out. But I will say that the biggest reason why this album stands out for me is the melody and the production. The way they're weave together. It's kind of a new thing for Björk. Her previous songs were either very heavy or very overtly beat driven, And this is a stripping back, and it's an approach. She's being the most melodic and in some ways approachable in terms of sound than she's ever been. And although it's still so complex and so definitely far from pop music, it has a sound that I think is more approachable to the casual listener. And it is just a pleasant, peaceful album that wraps you up in a cocoon of warmth on a cold winter night in the house when you have your warm cup of tea and the snow is constantly falling outside and you're just longing for an interior, insular, introspective kind of blissful experience. And so this album truly delivers that and lives up to its amazing title. Again, I'm so in love with this album, and when I do listen to it, it just orally transports you somewhere else. I highly also recommend a B-side track that was not released with the album, but is a bonus track, Generous Palm Stroke, which also has this beautiful harp background that she plays really beautifully. And you know I love the harp. So whenever that's employed with Björk's voice, it's the most melodic and soothing sound I've ever heard from her music. So for me, this is my favorite album of hers. I don't know if she's ever going to be able to top this album. I think it was Björk at her most melodic and at her most sort of atmospheric. That is my review of Vespertine, and I do hope to review all of Björk's albums in the future. And let me know again what your experiences with this album were, because it's a very, it's critics call it her best album, but there's a lot of, interpretation about the songs, and there's just so much to discuss. So I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are. And I hope you enjoyed this, any Björk fans out there. And I hope to see you again sometime soon with another review. Thanks for watching. Bye.